Part of my study was the story of the Soviet Jewry during the 1950s, 60s, and 1970s, after Stalin's death and the end of the anti-Jewish policy, at least overt, aggressive anti-Jewish policy. What actually happened to this Jewish community, one of the largest communities in the world at that time, approximately 2.25 million Jews were in the Soviet Union at that time. And one of the aspects that I wanted to search was their occupational and educational involvement in the general society, in the general processes, how they involved, and to what extent the unique political factors, namely the anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union, how they affected the development of the Jewish community. So it was a work with a lot of statistics, with a lot of data. Some data provided us very essential information about the numbers, about the tendencies among the Soviet Jews, but still it was not clear why such tendencies took place, why they occurred. And therefore I decided to go into details and to search the trends among the Soviet Jews themselves and to what extent they dovetailed the general Soviet policy of education and occupation, and how the Soviet Jews were what was their position in this educational and occupational hierarchies in the Soviet time. Well, the question was whether the story of anti-Semitism, all this narrative of the Soviet anti-Semitism, camouflaged anti-Semitism, unofficial policy of anti-Semitism, to what extent it can explain us the situation with the Soviet Jewry and the tendencies in this occupational and educational hierarchy. To some extent, yes, but there were several other factors that influenced this development. As a result of these various factors, among them general, the development of the state, especially the development of the state, the Soviet Union after Second World War, the total destruction, total destroy of the whole western part of the Soviet Union, most urbanized and most industrialized part, and the need to re-establish, to rebuild, to reconstruct huge cities and factories and mines and et cetera, bridges, all these requested many professional cadres, from skilled workers to the engineers and architects and et cetera. And therefore the Soviet regime, to be honest, they invested a lot of money and power in creation new institutions and universities, especially during the late 40s, 1950s, 1960s, and they promoted and they actually stimulated population, youngsters, to achieve as high education as possible. And Jews were part of this general trend. On the other side, we can see in this occupational hierarchy two very clear elements. The bottom and the top of this pyramid was actually blocked for the Jews. The top was blocked and the bottom was abandoned. What is the top? Top was the top state and party apparatus. Almost no Jews, and obviously not in the prominent, very high positions like members of the Politburo, party leaders in the republics, republics like Ukraine, Lithuania, Estonia, Uzbekistan, doesn't matter. And also governmental bodies. It was very difficult to find any Jewish minister. And interesting, if we can find some minister in some particular republic, men of Jewish origin, so it was very clear that their position was in something very economical. Minister of Housing and Construction, Minister of Finance, Deputy Minister of such and such industries, positions like this, nothing about ideology, real leadership, no, very professional field. So it was at the top of this pyramid, At the bottom, it was actually agriculture and all kind of forest industry, actually already abandoned by the Jews themselves. They were just not interested anymore. The new generation of the Jews were not interested in such occupations in agriculture, so very small number. And therefore, overwhelming majority were over-concentrated actually in three sectors, which is skilled workers, kind of using the Soviet cliche, the worker class nobility. So workers with special skills, usually achieved by this professional education. So not very simple works, but some technical works at the proletarian level, but with some formal education. Then were academic, people with high education, and then people with academic degrees, candidates and doctors. And still it was, for me, it was quite partial explanation, because not in all fields Jews were represented equally. Significant number of the Jews in these positions were concentrated in so-called technological spheres. It's over-technologization, we can say. The issue, the effect of over-technologization led me to check really in what fields Jews were really integrated in masses and what field they were integrated in very selective way. And it showed me the whole picture of the Soviet style of selective integration of certain national minority. We obviously may recall the very long line of the prominent Jews, even with Jewish names and Jewish family names, not Russified, who were prominent, very important artists and filmmakers and engineers and scientists and Nobel Prize laureates, members of the Academy of Sciences. The line will be very, very long. And at the same time, we know from the memoirs of the same period, a lot of stories of disappointment, feeling of being oppressed, feeling of being segregated in some way, especially in the field of education and occupation. So the combination of these factors led me to understand the complexity of the Soviet policy, which on the one side directed by the needs of the Soviet economy, which needed skillful professional cadres, and the higher was the level of education, the more specific, the more necessary were the skills of particular Jew or non-Jew, the less the authorities were willing to check his or her ethnic origin. In other words, the high number of Jews who worked for nuke program of the Soviet Union or for satellite and space program of the Soviet Union was actually the result of the need to produce as quick as possible, as effective as possible, the Soviet response to the American program. We are speaking about the time of the Cold War. And therefore, it was not so important for the regime whether you are Jewish or Uzbek or Kazakh or Estonian or Latvian, whatever, member of the party or non-member of the Communist Party, if you produce something very unique and very necessary, so you will get very high position. And this was actually the main idea of this selective integration. It wasn't something new for the Soviet Jews. If we take, for example, if we compare, for example, is pre-Soviet time, it was quite normal situation during the Tsarist period, when selective groups among the Jews were excluded from the Jewish masses and promoted because of their skills or their fortune, whatever. The situation was completely different during the 1920s and 1930s, when the integration was collective and in masses. And now it was kind of returned to the pre-Soviet regime, of course, in new conditions and new terms, but again, the modus vivendi of this process was you have to be highly skilled, highly professional in the very important field for the general society, for the government, for the regime, and then you may get even better conditions in housing, in salary, in your academic career than any other people of your classmates, for instance. And it's not only in the fields, very unique fields like in youth program or space program. At some point I pay attention to the number of Jewish coaches and gym teachers, gym trainers, also raise it. And it was very clear because they are those who are going to prepare Soviet athletes for the World Championship, for the Olympic Games, and therefore they are very necessary. Soviet Union wants gold medal, wanted to get more gold medals, and therefore in this case a Jewish coach was at the same position like a Jewish scientist who are doing nuclear bomb. So this way or another, the Soviet system of selective integration in the educational and occupational hierarchy actually trained Jews and forced them, stimulated them to achieve as high education as possible, to achieve as high position as possible to a certain level. Not the top, not the leading, but very high situation. And I call this a combination of several factors. The academization of the education, as high academic as possible, the technologization of the occupation. Certain fields are actually employment sanctuaries for the Jews, and finally the pioneerization of the Jewish occupation in the Soviet Union, not in terms of the Soviet pioneers as we remember, not those kids with red banners, but pioneers in terms of going to the unknown fields. Who knew in the 1950s what is cybernetic? It was kind of Chinese for the overwhelming majority, even educated people. What is microbiology? What is genetics? And therefore those fields were treated like something very exotic. And we see how Jews became the pioneers in these fields at a certain period of time, and then the others followed their way, and those fields started to flourish in 1970s and 80s by the late period of the Soviet regime. So the selective social integration of national minorities and Jewish minorities in different countries, it's not unique for the Soviet system, but the research done on this particular case shows us some patterns that developed among the Jewish communities all over the world in accordance to the local conditions, and I did it on the case of the Soviet Jews in 1950s and 1960s.